So I'm going to start that now, and it's probably telling you that the recording is in progress. So that is good. And with that, I will turn it over to Lisa and let her get started.
Thank you, Mackenzie. And it's so wonderful to see all of you here tonight. Thank you all for joining us. I want to do a brief introduction to Tori, and then I'm going to get into some questions. And I have about a dozen questions for her, so I hope we can cover them all in the next hour and then open up the floor for all of you to ask questions. For those of you who are just somewhat familiar with Tori, or maybe you're meeting her for the first time tonight, Tori is a native Tucsonan, and we're proud to say that she is from our lovely desert Pueblo city. And she did move away for a little bit, and she recently moved back. Well, it's been a few years now. We're glad that she's back, and we're able to exhibit her work at the museum. And Tori has been making miniatures since she was a young girl, introduced by her grandmother to miniatures, but through an article about the Colleen Moore Fairy Castle, which is located in Chicago at the Museum of Science and Industry. And she continued to explore many different arts and crafts, and eventually became involved with miniatures. And she is an IGMA Fellow. As Mackenzie mentioned, she is a member of the International Guild of Miniature Artisans at the fellow level. And she received her fellow in 2001, and it's in animal figures. So that's a little background. And Tori, welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I see some familiar faces here, a lot of people.
Yeah, it's nice to see. All right, I'm going to get started with the questions. And as I was just saying, you've been involved with miniatures for quite some time. Can you share a little bit about how you got into the hobby a little bit more deeply than just dabbling?
Well, as you mentioned, I started pretty young. And then there was one miniature store here in Tucson. It was actually Frances Sneller's Antique and Miniature World a long, long time ago. And she had a few things, and she taught me how to use polymer clay and gave me a few tips. Then an actual dollhouse store opened in the late 70s. Was started by Irene Kahn. And then a little club got together. That was when the Miniature Society started. And so I was a charter member of that. And then through the encouragement of those people, I just kept progressing in the hobby. Some of the people that joined later were IGMA members and encouraged me to further my work and apply for artisan and then later fellow. So that's how I got into the professional aspect of it.
So Tori, when you first started in miniatures in the club, were there many people in the club?
I'm going to say there was about, I don't know, maybe a dozen. We used to meet at people's house, go to people's houses and meet because we had no place to meet. So yeah, it was just starting off. I think in the late 70s and early 80s, I read that the miniatures hobby was the third most popular hobby in the country. So it was really taking off then, as it is now with the pandemic. It's rising back up there. But people were just figuring out, that was back in the day. We were making I remember people making books out of avocado peels and things that, we wouldn't really do now, but we used a lot of junk making whatever we could come up with to make miniatures. So
that's an interesting start to the hobby. I was asking because I knew that was kind of the start of the heyday. So I was kind of curious how busy the club was here in Tucson at that time.
We got some of the members had large collections. Of course, Pat Arnell was collecting then at that time. So some of the people that are still in the industry, they were here already collecting miniatures and making miniatures.
For those of you who don't know, Pat Arnell, who Tori just mentioned, is the founder of our museum, the Mini Time Machine Museum. And yes, she started getting into the hobby in the late 70s and eventually amassed a pretty decent sized collection. And in 2009, opened our museum with her collection. And we've been growing since. Well, I want to get back into the conversation about your work in particular now, Tori. So as you know, and I think many of you probably saw, the title of the show includes the paper clay. This is an exhibit that really focuses on your work in paper clay. I was wondering, was there a primary material you used before you discovered paper clay?
No, I used everything I could find. I've used polymer clay, wood. Most of the things I had to make that I sculpted, I used polymer clay for, but not everything. And I do wood carving, and I used metal, whatever I thought would do the job best. I have a little. This is something that I made back then. This chair actually is made of wood, and it's a replica of one of my daughter's chairs. And then I made the little Raggedy Ann that's made out of polymer clay. And now I'd probably make all of that out of paper clay, but that was from a while back. So yeah, I just used whatever I thought would work best for the subject. No, I don't do a whole lot of sewing, but if that's what I needed to do to make it work, I'd do that.
So if you made that today, you would actually make the chair out of polymer clay, or not polymer clay, paper clay instead of wood?
I probably would make some of it out of paper clay. I might make the very, very thin rails out of wood still. And the reason I use paper clay now for most of the things that I used to make with wood is because it's 100% compatible with itself, meaning that even if you break something with wood and you use wood filler, it's still never exactly right. But if you break something with paper clay and fix it with paper clay, you'd never know.
So this leads me to my next question, which is, how did paper clay impact your miniature work?
I stopped using just about everything else and started experimenting with that for everything. The reason that I didn't I still occasionally use polymer clay, but the main reason that I don't like it is because it melts when I use it. I'm a hot-blooded woman or something. As soon as I touch it, it starts falling apart. So it never really worked for me the way I liked it to. I was always having to let it cool down, or some people said, well, use the harder kind, and I was never really satisfied with it. And then, like I said, for wood objects too, this paper clay can be carved and sanded and cut in all of the ways that I was using wood for. So that works for me. It can look like just about anything.
Its versatility really is pretty amazing, because you can use it. It sounds like you use it as sculpture, use it as carve. When you carve it, do you just take it out of the package, or do you hollow out a form, or how do you get started when you carve it?
Well, I let it dry in many different forms. I make carving blanks, and I also make blanks for turning it on a lathe. I use some additives with that. So when it's dry, it's about the same consistency as as basswood maybe, only it doesn't have any grain or anything. So you can carve it with regular carving tools. You can saw it and sand it and all the things you can do with wood. So yeah, I let it dry. I also make a lot of flat, dry sheets of it. At any given time, I have a whole stack of dried flat pieces of paper clay and blocks of paper clay. I always have it blocks, dry sheets. I make a paste out of it, so I have it in paste form. I make a powder out of it. I make a mostly liquid that I can squeeze out of a piping tool or bag, and then powdered. So it's in all those ways.
Though you're a miniaturist, I keep thinking to myself that you're a sculptor, a miniature sculptor, really. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I used, before I did miniatures, and after, and also even after I did miniatures, I used to do I've illustrated some children's books and done more two-dimensional work. But for me, sculpting is easier than drawing. I know that's not true for everybody, but for me, it is. So.
Well, I think clearly you're really successful with it. We love
Thank
the
you.
work that we're exhibiting. The other thing that's really wonderful about paper clay is it's so light. As we were installing the show, I know a couple people were picking things up to move them around. I said, oh, it's so deceiving. It looks like it's going to be really heavy, and then it's just really light. So that's a nice benefit too, if you're taking it places and so on.
It is very light. They actually have another product that's even lighter than that. It's called Delight, and it's like you can't even feel it. You could make huge earrings with it and wouldn't even know you were wearing them.
So my next question, we kind of answered it already, but you can just let me know if there's anything else you'd want to add. I was going to ask you if you scrapped any other materials in lieu of paper clay, or did you just add as another tool to your kit? You kind of implied that you got rid of polymer clay in light of paper clay.
Yeah, mostly polymer clay and wood. I now use paper clay for. I, of course, couldn't replace metal, but I do make some paper clay things that look like metal. So
All right. I wanted to ask you a little bit about animation, because a few of the pieces in the show are animated. And I remember previously when we exhibited your work, when it was part of the local miniature club's exhibit a few years ago, that you had an animated piece in there as well. So can you tell me a little bit about what inspired you to animate some of your pieces?
well, I've always been really interested in like Disneyland and Jim Henson's work and that type of thing. Then my husband and I used to make little animated things, not little animated things, big animated things for Halloween parties, etc. And I had the idea that I wanted to, our first animated miniature was a wizard's tower. And I decided I wanted to see if we could animate that. And so I basically wrote a script for how I wanted it to go, and made the mechanics, and then he did the programming with the we've used at that time Basic Stamp. They're just little computers that are like use basic programming language, and they can only do like 8 functions on a stamp, but back then that was amazing. So yeah, we started. I just think it's something that is so much fun, and I have so many ideas for animated things. So that's how we got started in it. Then we continued making animated pieces for a while, then stopped for a while, and now I'm back to working on them.
So does your husband usually help you with the animation, or just when you first got off the ground with that?
No, he used to, but he got bored with it. So I realized that I only need to know a little bit of what he knows in order to do it. So I'm still learning a lot of stuff on my own, but what I need to know is, now it's a little bit easier now than it used to be for a number of reasons. One is because the motors are smaller and easier to get, and the microcontrollers have more capacity. Now you can actually buy a very tiny computer to run the whole thing. I mean, way more power than you'd ever need, but back then we didn't have that capability. So we were struggling to try and put as many animations as we could together on a small card.
When you say back then, what years are you referring to?
We made our first animated piece in '99, I believe.
Mhm. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, and then we used to joke about that a lot because we'd watch the shows where they did animatronics or look up animatronics things, and we'd be like, oh sure, it's big when you're doing it. I mean, it's easy when you're doing it life size, off the shelf stuff you can get. But so obviously when you're doing that, you have to make all the mechanics at that size. But even that now they have mechanical Legos you can use for some of it. So
yeah, it's great to see technology advance. That made me think too, who else was making animated miniatures back in around the 2000?
A few people were working on some things. I know Andy and Joe Bevilacqua were doing some things. The guys from Texas were working on a few things. Most people didn't keep it up. Another problem back at that time is that stuff is expensive. It was more expensive than, and so there were some collectors that were willing to pay for it, but it just wasn't as popular as you might think it would have been. But so I can't really think of who else was doing. I know some people were doing things here and there. I'm trying to remember who had a Frankenstein exhibit. Someone had Frankenstein's lab that they had animated, and I can't remember who it was. Maybe someone on here would remember, but there were very few people doing it, but there were some.
Frankenstein's lab sounds like a lot of fun. That would be a good one to animate.
Yeah, it was. And then I didn't see it in person, but I heard about it at a show. Heard it was at a show. So we have done quite a number of pieces, and then we went to smaller things like just doing it for a commission. We've done like a working dumbwaiter and smaller animated fairies, or like cats with on a tombstone with lighted eyes and things like that. Just small pieces. And then not as many large pieces.
Were you sharing ideas or techniques with others at the time, or now do you do that, or do you kind of just do it on your own and not really?
We weren't really. Actually, we didn't even really know anybody else who was doing it until we were asked to be interviewed for an article. And that article was not until, I think 2004 or 5. So, however, we attempted to share it. We gave several talks at Guild School about how to animate your miniatures, and no one ever did it. So everyone was excited about it, but it was kind of like once we got to the programming or the math part, they were like, I don't know. I didn't know there was going to be math. I didn't know. So, and you don't have to use microcontrollers. You can use gear motors, etc. But it's a lot to take in to first start thinking about it. So we actually thought, after we gave those seminars, we gave a class at a national on LEDs. That was before people were using LEDs. And it was the same sort of thing. We wanted them to know everything about it, but their eyes kind of glazed over, like, but they all made, their projects, and we thought that was going to take off. And LEDs, of course, have taken off.
Tori, you've cut out. I don't know if you're aware.
Oops, we seem to have had just a little technical difficulty. Hopefully Tori will be back with us in just a second.
In the meantime, I want to mention that in our museum, we do actually have a couple of animatons. We have a piece from 1885 that a Swiss architect or a Swiss clockmaker and ophthalmologist built. He built 5 of them for his godchildren, I should say. And they're really quite sophisticated. And so there is a tradition of making miniatures with animation that Tori is certainly following up with as she starts to as she explored her own version of that. Mackenzie, do you want to maybe play show some images of her work while we're waiting for her to reconnect?
Absolutely, I can definitely do that. One second.
I didn't get a chance to see that earlier. Thank you all for your patience as well. Of course, when we practiced last night, we had no glitches. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to make a comment or ask a general question?
Lisa, she just said a note that she's going to try to log back on and see if she can get the camera and stuff to work again.
Okay, thank you, Lonnie. I see that somebody wanted to know if we could have her share a package of paper clay and show what it looks like and how she manipulates it. And I will definitely ask her that when we get back online with her.
Hayden, did you have a question? Would you like to share with us?
What's the smallest object you have in the museum?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. Well, we just acquired a piece that is not actually on the floor yet because we just received it, but it was from our recent exhibit of miniatures in the eye of a needle. So it's the smallest piece we have in the collection. And a regular sewing needle, which is about, maybe 2.5 inches long. The sculpture is, on the side of the needle, and it's probably 1/8 of an inch tall, which I'm trying to show you with my fingers, which I don't know if you can see because of the way my light is shining. Can you kind of get a sense? You can put your fingers together like that. It'll give you a sense of how tiny it is. You have to look at it through a magnifying glass to see it. Good question, Caden. Thank you.
That's cool. What's the subject matter of the little sculpt, Lisa?
It is actually the flower parade from Colombia. The artist who created it is Flor Carvajal, and she was creating scenes of some of the history and traditions of her culture and her country. And the Parade of the Flowers is a big celebration in May in Colombia. And so she sculpted the farmers carrying their flowers along the side of the needle. So as I said, we just received that piece following her exhibit. It was a gift to the museum from her, and we'll be putting it on display probably in the new year, probably around January. Caden, I see you have your hand up. Do you have another question?
I thought I saw Tori joins again.
Let's see, she's there. Tori, are you there? I see her name there. So if she can put her camera on, we can pick back up.
Lisa, she left a comment in the chat that she's back, but her camera is still not working.
I see that now. Thank you, Michael. Tori, can you hear me? Is your microphone working?
She says that her camera is still not working, but I'm hopeful that maybe we can get her audio back.
Okay, sounds like she's getting another microphone, so it'll be just a few more minutes. Thank you everyone for your patience. We appreciate that. If anybody else has a question, I'm happy to do my best to answer it.
Lisa, it's Michael. I was wondering how many pieces are in Tori's show?
Oh my goodness, I don't think I counted. Let me see. Let me think for a minute. There are 5 little fairy houses. There is a larger fairy house, that's 6. There is a French doorway, that's 7. There are 3 little narrative desert animals. And then we have 2 casitas and 2 pieces that feature fairies that have wings that flutter and light up. And then we have a piece of a scarecrow and some pumpkins, like a Halloween scene. And that one also has some animation and some lights in it. So I don't know if you were counting the total, Michael, or not, but that's the number of pieces in the show. And Caden, I see you have another question.
What's the largest piece you have?
It's the largest piece we have. Well,
the front door, maybe?
yeah, that's a good answer. The Yellow Rose of Texas is a miniature house. It's a mansion. It's a Texas mansion. And it is about 12 feet long by about 2 feet deep and about 3 feet tall. And let's see, how many rooms does it have? It probably has about a dozen rooms and a little bit of landscaping and a car as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can see.
Oh, yay. We see you again.
I think we can see Tori, but we maybe can't hear her. So
She left again.
oh no.
There we go. You look like you have your microphone, Tori. Just
Okay.
yay.
Oh, so I'm so sorry about that.
Everyone was very patient. Thank you all for your
Yeah,
patience.
I could hear everybody. I just couldn't, nobody could hear me. So
All right.
sorry about that.
Tori, we did have a question while you were away that I don't know that you heard. Someone asked if you could show a package of paper clay and a little bit about what it looks like and how you manipulate it.
Sure. Here's my dog. If you can see her, she's in the way, of course. Not being very helpful. I'm trying. Okay, this is what the package looks like. And I have some that's open here.
And while Tori's grabbing that, I want to mention the sculpture of the horse that's on the package. That's also in our show. Tori designed that and was honored to be able to have some of her pieces selected for the advertising for paper clay. So that's another one to add to the list of pieces in the show.
So basically, when you take it out of the package, I keep it in an airtight container for using it. It's basically like, feels a little bit like pie dough. You can roll it out. You can sculpt it just like this. You can see it. I can get it pretty thin, just sculpt it like, oh, I guess pretty much the same as terracotta clay or any clay that consistency. It's damp. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Thank you for pulling that out and sharing
Oh,
that.
you're welcome.
All right, we're going to jump back into the questions.
Okay.
And so the next question I had for you is, I know that you do all kinds of different creative endeavors, not just miniatures. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about some of the other things that you do, and then maybe talk about whether or not the different things you do influence one another. So do your miniatures influence the other things you do, like drawing? I know you draw, or does the drawing ever influence the miniatures? Whatever you want to share about that.
Well, I usually sketch things out. I don't really think they mix together. When I draw, the things that I've drawn are, I've had a line of greeting cards or note cards and Christmas cards that were produced, and I've illustrated some children's books. They don't necessarily carry over, except for maybe the whimsical factor, because I like made a whole series of desert animals doing various and sundry things. It's kind of silly, but like I said, I do find it easier to sculpt than to draw. So I usually sculpt things, and then I do large size crafts too. I was on the paper clay design team for quite some time, so I made a lot of, like, little monsters and things that aren't miniatures, but just fun things to make, and some balanced toys. I do a lot of pumpkin carving, and I actually had put that, I'm not sure if it's still on my screen. If we had time, I was gonna maybe share the screen on that, because that's another thing I really enjoy doing, is pumpkin carving. But I'm going to wait and maybe try that at the end if we have any time, because I don't want to lose the camera again. I'm
seen plenty of
afraid
pumpkin
now.
designs. You do amazing pumpkins from what I've seen. And it's getting to be pumpkin season, huh?
Yeah, that's why I'm excited about it already. It just takes that little bitty chill in the air, and I'm like, it must be time to carve pumpkins. Getting there.
So you don't really feel like they impact one another. You feel like they're kind of two different separate things? Or what about the pumpkin carving? Does that sort of influence, or has it been impacted by your work in miniatures?
Maybe the other way around. I've made pumpkin structures for miniatures, and I've made miniature pumpkins. So maybe the other way. I think, of course, I can say that all of my art of every type ties together in the way that I just always, everything that I look at, pretty much, I think of things to create with it. So it's just the way my mind works, that I see, dirt. It's like, oh, what can I make with that? Lots of things.
Mm-hmm. And that just weaves nicely right into my next question, which is, you have such an eclectic subject matter, and our show includes a lot of different types of subjects. How do you decide what subjects you're going to depict in miniatures?
I want to say whatever the fairies tell me that day, but that's not exactly true. I don't really have a good answer for that. I'm inspired by seeing other people's work. That's a lot of what inspires me. I'm inspired by nature. I read a lot of books, and I can't really define where the inspiration comes from. Every time I see someone's work, and I think it's really cool. I'm like, I want to try that. I want to, or in the case of like the door that's in the exhibit, that was part of a club. Our club was doing doors. And so I just looked at, that was, I guess you could say, an assignment. And of course, I'm inspired when people give me commissions too, that are, if they can tell me what they want and I get all excited about it, then we're on the right track. They can convince me that, oh yeah, I want to make that right now. So
what are you working on right now, subject matter wise?
right now I am working on many different things. Some fairy things that I plan to combine with live plants. That's an interest of mine now. Like the ones that I have in the exhibit, as you know, are for live plants, but of course we couldn't have them in the exhibit that way. So I can weatherproof this clay and put it with exhibits. And that's, I want to make some wall hung miniatures that I have some ideas for, ones that are like in a picture frame with plants that you can open. When you open the picture frame, you will also be opening the miniature, but otherwise it will look just like a little house. Then I have a couple of commissions in the works. Don't have anything to do with that. So one of those is a 1/144 scale Christmas house I'm making. And yeah, that's basically what I got going on right now.
Sounds good.
I also I'm working on some animated pieces also. I just recently figured out a cool way I could make a raven do what I wanted to do, move its head and its wings in a way that I wanted. And so I wanted to make a haunted saloon with a old skeleton playing the piano and a raven outside and some ghosts. And, I like to do special effects too. We've used the Pepper's ghost effect several times, so plan to have some ghosts dancing around the saloon. So.
Oh, that sounds like fun. Sounds like something we might want to exhibit at the Halloween season. I'll have to hit you up for that.
So
Well, wait,
Lisa, we have a question from Caden. Can I just interrupt and let
Go
him?
ahead, go ahead.
What's your favorite miniature?
He asked, what's your favorite miniature? I know he cut in and out a little bit, so.
Oh, golly, that's a hard question. That I've made or that other people have made? My favorite miniature that I've made, I think, is the love potion, the animated love potion one that was in the museum a while back. Because it was just so much fun. And it's got a little poem that goes with it. And yeah, I had a lot of fun making that one. My favorite, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't know what my favorite miniature is that other people have made. I have tried to collect a little something from every miniaturist that I've taken class from, and I love all of those. So I can't really say a favorite of those. I do have a very, very tiny porcelain bunny that I just love to death. So it might be that.
Aw, cute.
And that makes me, that leads right into my next question. So thank you, Caden, because you're right. You're thinking just like me. I was going to ask you, who is it that you admire in the miniature world, which is a similar question. And why do you admire them?
Whenever I'm asked that question, the first people that come to mind are Pat and Noel Thomas. I guess they're kind of my idols in miniatures because their work is so realistic, and they've done some whimsical pieces as well. But I think I was lucky enough to take a class with him, get to take a class with him, and it all clicked together because our styles are similar, our philosophies of working are similar. And I said to Steve when I took that class, oh, see, now I know why I love their work so much, is because they realize, like I do, just how dirty the world is. You know, like all of the people who try and make things perfect and line up and everything, and that's not really what life is like. It's messy. It's fun and messy.
I can definitely see relationship between your work and the Thomas's work. I can see why you feel that way. It makes a lot of sense. So along that line, what do you find the most challenging about making miniatures?
Uh, I don't know. I like to always like to try and challenge myself with something new. So trying new things, I guess, would be the challenge. I always want to just try something I've never done before. And half the time it doesn't work, you know, but that's okay. It's how I learn. Uh,
Keeps
so,
it new.
yeah.
So what do you find most rewarding about making miniatures? This is my last question.
Okay, the thing I find, that's a much easier one. The thing I find most rewarding about it is making people smile. That it's whether it's something that I make for them, or whether it's just them seeing my work and getting excited about it, or whether it's helping them make something, teaching them how to make something themselves, and they get all excited because they see their vision come to life. See, I get choked up about that. I really, seriously, I mean, there's just nothing better than seeing somebody make a thing that they've been working really hard on, and then they're like, their whole face lights up like a kid's, you know, like, this is so great, I made it. I made my vision come true. So I like it when people look at my work, and I see this, especially like I sometimes hide things in my work, and then I see people find it and like, oh, did you see that little creature? And so it's the smiles. That's it.
I love that. That's one thing that's so wonderful about miniatures, is because they're so small and intricate. A lot of times you can look at them so many times before you notice this particular detail. And then one day it just pops out to you. I've been at the museum for 12 years and I still am seeing new things that I haven't noticed in some of our pieces. So it's definitely true. It's a wonderful, wonderful element to miniatures. Well, I'm going to open up the floor for our audience's questions. I think Mackenzie might have a few in the chat, and then of course
And I see
we'll
Caden
have
waving
the
his
opportunity
hand
for
like
others.
Yeah, and we've got another great question from Caden. Caden, do you want to go first and start?
Sure. What's your most popular piece?
Well, probably it was the Wizard's Tower when we made it, but no one, hardly anyone knows about it now. And the reason for that is because it got ruined in a move, and so it hasn't been seen publicly for a really long time. But I intend to make that someday. The witch piece is also very popular. The love potion one I just mentioned, that's a popular one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tori, we've had a couple of people ask the question of how long, in terms of hours or days or time, does it take you to make one of your creations?
There's only one correct answer to that, and that's all my life. That's how long it takes. It varies so much. I can't really answer that. I mean, I guess if I make that many different creations, I can't even guess. I'd have to do it individually. So I can't give a specific answer to that.
Another question that we had was regarding the paper clay. How long does it take to dry? Do you have any tricks for making it dry faster? And do you always allow it to air dry, or is there another process?
How long it takes to dry depends on the thickness and the weather where you're at. I do have some tricks to make it dry faster. I live in Arizona, so I just put it outside. But other than that, if you can put it in the oven at a very low temperature, obviously if you have any kind of armature that you need to be concerned about, you can't do that, but you can put it in the oven for a while. It usually doesn't take all that long though. Like I say, if you live somewhere very humid, maybe it would take longer. But you can bake it. I have not tried this yet, but I'm certain you could also put it in a food dehydrator. That would work also.
So that's great. So there was a question about if you have any recipes that you could share for making paper clay paste to be able to turn on a lathe, or recipes for adapting it to turn on a wheel.
To make the paste, all I do is put it in put some of the clay in a prescription bottle or an airtight bottle and add some water to it and start mixing it. I'll leave it there for maybe a day and then see how it is. And then add some more water to it if I need to. I can grab it over here. My dog is right here. She's just, so it's about the consistency. I don't know if you can see how it's kind of like icing thick. So it does take a while you have to keep mixing it to get it to that consistency though, but it's not, that's the only recipe, is just adding water until it gets to the consistency you want it to be. You can also add water and get it to where you can paint it on things as well. So it can be used anywhere from dry to liquid state. As far as turning it on the lathe, I just actually showed this to somebody else the other day, so I have a blank here. When I turn it on the lathe, I used to just take a dry chunk and cut it, but I will add, then I will add some acrylic paint to it. I took a prescription bottle and I cut holes in it so air could cut the ends off and cut holes in it so air could go through. And then I got a piece of fabric that is mesh fabric and put that inside the bottle and then stuff the clay in there, the paint and clay mixture. And that's dependent on just paint. Paper clay is adsorptive, it's not absorptive, which means that the paint will coat the particles, it won't be absorbed. So no matter how much paint you put with it, it's not going to be a full color, but you can color it. And you'll get it on your hands if you play with it with your hands. But anyway, so then I packed the clay into that tube as much as I could get it in there and then let it dry that way. So now I have a little turning blank I can turn on the lathe. So you want to get it if you're adding paint to it to make a turning blank, you want to just get it so that it's workable still and not super sticky. And then just put it in a form.
So we had a question about how do you compensate for shrinkage as the clay dries? Is there a formula that you use, or is it just know-how, or how do you do that?
The clay only shrinks by approximately 6% when it dries. And I have done literally probably 100 experiments on this in measuring it various ways. And that's about average. So if I'm making something if I'm making a flat piece that I'm going to saw, I just make it a little larger. And then to make sure I'm going to be able to fit the pattern on it. Otherwise, I don't really worry about it that much, because if it shrinks away from something or cracks a little bit, I just add more clay after it's dry. It's just, and if you're using it in a mold, that shrinkage is great because it usually just pops right out of the mold. So, and then there are ways you can, like if you put it over the edge of something, that will help it hold its shape onto a form if you're using it on a form.
So there was just a question submitted that how do you make powdered paper clay?
There are a number of ways you can do that. You can use sandpaper, as long as you have the sandpaper where the bits of sand aren't coming off into it. You can use a little nutmeg grater. It's funny that people often ask me how I make the powdered paper clay, but not what I do with it. So anyway, I don't usually make very much of it. Yeah, you can just shave it off, or you can use a little grater, or use the sandpaper, or a file if you have a diamond file. I have two different sets of files. I have files that I only use on metal, and then diamond files that I only use on paper clay. So I don't mix those up, but you can use a diamond file or a Rippler file, whatever you want to use to file it.
So now you've piqued my interest. What do you do with the powdered paper clay?
Well, what I do with it is if I have a very tiny thing, if something is scratched, or I have a very tiny spot I need to fill in, or a very tiny detail to add, I dip a paintbrush in water, and then I dip it into the powdered clay, and I put that over the scratches or marks to fill in marks, or make a very tiny little bit of paste with it to fill in details. Or I can mix it up with water and make snow out of it too. So,
Well, thank you for sharing that.
you're welcome.
So we had another question. What do you add to the paper clay to make it ready to turn on a wheel?
Nothing. It's right out of the package. You can turn it basically like you would a terracotta clay, and just use water in the same manner, like with a little paintbrush. You can, I'm going to grab them right here. My dog's right tail, I almost got her tail under the chair. So you just put it on the wheel. I have a very tiny potter's wheel that I got from Craig Roberts many years ago. And then you just use, instead of using your fingers like you would on a regular potter's wheel, just use paintbrushes. And so that was turned, I mean, that was done on a little potter's wheel. And then this one was one turned on a lathe. And I know that you can't see the finish very well with that, but this has no finish on it. It is just I just used a piece of paper to polish it while I was on the lathe. So it has no varnish or anything. So yeah, did I answer this question?
Yeah, that's great. So one thing that Lonnie mentioned is she was wondering, oh, wait, we had a question. Michael's asking, what kind of tools do you use when you are lathe turning?
Mostly the files. I also have a little set of, actually, I think they came from Micromark, but I do have a set of miniature carving tools. But files work very well. Just, I mean, it's soft enough that you can just use the Riffler files.
Caden, it looks like you have another question. Do you want to share with us?
What's the smallest piece you've ever made?
What's the smallest piece you've ever made?
In that tiny 1/8 scale casita that was shown in the PowerPoint presentation, on the wall of that, there is a cat. That's a 1/8 scale miniature, meaning 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. And the cat is looking down into the garden, and there's a tiny mouse in there. It's almost impossible to see. That's the smallest miniature I've ever made.
So Lonnie wanted me to ask you if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about the show that's coming up for the Tucson Miniature Society.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're having a show on October 16th and 17th this year at the Women's Center. And we have raffle prizes and a display room. The little casita was part of that. Our club project is the casitas, but not at that scale. So Lonnie has flyers for that, and if you go to our webpage for the Tucson Miniature Society, you can find that there, or we can put it in the chat.
So we also have Flyers at the museum as well, if you're able to get to the museum to get one of those. Caden had his hand raised again, but I'm not sure if he's still with us. So since it is 7:30, I just wanted to do kind of a last call for, oh, yep, Caden, one more question. Uh-oh, he looks like he's kind of frozen.
There he goes.
There we go. Maybe. Caden, do you have another question?
No.
Okay. So we did have a quick question. How do you reconstitute dried out paper clay?
There are a number of ways you can do it. You can grate it and then add water to it. You can take the block and put it in some water and let it start to soak in, and then scrape the reconstituted stuff off as it gets reconstituted, and then just keep doing that. I don't recommend it. I've done it a few times and it's never the same. You can use that for maybe some scrap projects or under some things, but it's not something I would recommend doing, really. I'd save it and carve it. Save the dried piece and use it for carving.
Okay, well, Tori, I'm not sure if we have any additional questions. I'm sure that you would be willing to answer them if people wanted to contact you directly.
Yeah.
And we can also pass on messages to her. But Lonnie has put information about the Tucson Miniature Show in the chat, so you can see that.
Yeah.
Oh, Gentry, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't see that. So I do want to thank you so much for joining us. Tori or Lisa, is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up?
I just wanted to also thank you, Tori. Really appreciate you taking the time tonight to share a little bit about your process and invite us in your studio. And thank all of you. I wanted to thank all of you for joining us tonight as well for this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it, and have a wonderful rest of the evening, everyone.
Thank you, and I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, but we got over it. So.
Many thanks to all of you for joining us again. Tori, thank you. And we hope that everyone will have a wonderful evening.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.